Good morning. Would like to call the Economic Development Authority for June 7th to order. If we can start with a roll call, please, Charity.
Director Freeman? Director Yanello? Not here yet. Director Joyce?
Present.
Director Derby?
Yes.
Director Fye?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Metz? Chairman Booth?
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you, Charity. First point of some housekeeping. I understand that the Cox transmissions are currently down. The city is actively working on that, but if you are at home and trying to log in through Cox, that's technical difficulties outside of our control at this point in time. You can log in through YouTube and the Poquoson channel to track this morning's meeting. So apologize for any inconvenience there. Our first order of business today is the consent agenda, which includes approval of our most recent meeting's minutes and the financial statement. Discussion needed on the consent agenda. Approval.
So moved.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Have a second. If we can call that for a vote, please, Charity.
Director Freeman?
Aye.
Director Joyce?
Aye.
Director Derby?
Yes.
Director Fye?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Metz? And Chairman Booth?
Aye.
Okay, you're approved.
Thank you, Charity. First order of business is public comments. Not seeing any here this morning. We'll move us into new business. Certainly are pleased to welcome Amy Jordan with the Hampton Roads Alliance to briefly be able to provide us with an update of the Alliance's activities and directions moving forward and things that are on their radar. So welcome, Amy.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. For those that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, I am Amy Jordan. I'm Vice President of Business Development for the Hampton Roads Alliance, our regional economic development organization for Hampton Roads. And I work on both business attraction and business retention and expansion opportunities. My focus area is typically around advanced manufacturing, maritime industries, unmanned systems, robotics. So for those that might not be familiar with the Alliance, I'll just give you a little bit of a brief because we did have some new localities come back in. We're excited to have them. So as a peninsula native, I feel complete again. But the Greater Williamsburg Partnership rejoined the Alliance, and so James City, York County, City of Williamsburg are back with us. So we represent 14 jurisdictions, the entire peninsula, and everything from Southampton over to Virginia Beach, currently all parts in between. And so just a little bit about our mission and vision statement. I won't spend too much time on this, but again, we are seen as sort of the collaborator to help connect business and the public sector together, working closely with our state partners, our locality partners, and the business community. So just a few changes that we've had. We've expanded some of the staff. That includes adding a BRE component to our Alliance team, and currently Toy Hunter serves in that capacity, and she is doing our business retention expansion. She actually came from VEDP in that role, so we're very excited that she has been with us leading that effort. And we also expanded an offshore wind supply chain development area and added Matt Smith to that, and have been leading that charge not only for Hampton Roads, but really for Virginia. And so the role of the Alliance, again, we have master agreements with all of the communities that we serve, and 50% of that funding, I think I had it on the previous slide, is from public, 50% is from private. So it truly is that public-private partnership to propel economic development forward. For those that have been on the EDA, you might be familiar with we did a IBM PLI investment strategy a few years ago, and that really really helped to start to redefine our mission. The fact that we needed to focus not only on attraction, but the retention expansion piece, and also what are those target sector areas that we should be focused on. So again, just a little bit about what we do with marketing, facilitating those discussions, assisting the businesses with growth. We also have a business intelligence team that does our research. I think that some of you have probably met Steve Harrison. He's been here before to present and give updates. Just again, engaging the region's top leaders in leading discussion around economic development for our region. So just a little bit about our business development. I mentioned that IBM study. So these are our priority sectors that were identified in that. And of course, we've added the offshore wind as that has become a new growing industry since that time. One that's not on here, but we are also looking at, it sort of falls under my advanced manufacturing umbrella currently, but standing up is that unmanned systems automation and robotics as well. So we have a big focus on that right now. And then lead generation. This is just a little bit about this past year. We have a consultant that actually works as our extension, basically. They're based in Frankfurt and have offices in Europe. They've also been doing some lead gen with some of their staff that they have stateside for us too. And so this really helps our reach and reaching out to companies. So you can see sort of how they're filling that pipelines with the number of companies that are reached out to, the number of meetings held, and then how many follow-up and ask for from those that are contacted or have meetings, the follow-up of information. So we're really getting that message out there when we go places. I know before it was, I would go to Europe and people wouldn't even know where Virginia is on the map. And now we're like, okay, you figured out Virginia. You got to focus on Hampton Roads. And so that's what our mission has been. So then again, just a little bit about that project pipeline this past year in 2021. You can see the amount of new projects that we had in those areas that we had been working on. So again, busy in that advanced manufacturing sector, very busy in that offshore wind area. So two very large focuses for us. And just a few of our recent announcements that we've had, quite a variety. And this is not necessarily a complete list, but it's really captures quite a cross-section of different businesses that have made major announcements. So you had the expansion of the U.S. headquarters for CMA CGM Group in Norfolk, very important for the Port of Virginia and its success. Mulberry and Newport News just recently announced, I want to say this is their second or third expansion there. They are a German company that does work with sensors, and so we're very excited to hear about or to work with them and learn about their expansion plans. Global Concrete in Franklin is another one that we worked with. Certified Origins in Newport News, it's actually an olive oil international European olive oil company, actually the second international European olive oil company we've attracted to this area in recent years, and so that's kind of exciting to see a diversity of the food and beverage industry that's very interested in this area, a lot of that driven by the Port of Virginia. SVT Robotics, that's another interesting one. I've actually worked with that company since my time when I was in James City County. They were in our incubator up there at Launchpad. Started as two individuals. They eventually outgrew that opportunity. One lived on the south side, so they did move to Norfolk. They have grown to well over 50, maybe 75 employees now. They plan to be at 100 in not too long, and their average salary is about $110,000 a year. So quite a success, and why that business retention expansion is so important to us to see companies like that grow. Breeze Airways at Norfolk International Airport. They continue to actually not only announce their service there, but since then have continued to announce expansion of service. So we're very excited about that opportunity and what it means for our reach. Area Aviations in Newport News, over by Newport News Airport, announced their expansion. And then most of y'all are probably familiar with Huntington Ingalls Unmanned Systems Center of Excellence, which has just recently started to operate and open. They're expanding in their space. They hopefully will have their kind of grand opening later this fall as they get things up and running. But we're very excited about that opportunity, and it's right around the corner from Poquoson in Hampton Roads Center North. So there's a tremendous amount of synergy with what's happening right there around the NASA Langley area and opportunities here. So I'm very excited about that. And then Siemens Gamesa in Portsmouth announced coming there to, again, help to stand up some of the wind expansion, offshore wind. So I mentioned the offshore wind, a little bit about what we did with that. We have what we call the Offshore Wind Landing, which has created sort of a hub for offshore wind companies that have come. It's international companies from Virginia, companies from other parts of the country, and it's a great place for them to come together. So the picture in the lower left-hand corner is from that hub. But again, you can see some of the things that they've just worked on this past year with really expanding the knowledge and reach and having a lot of dignitaries that are coming so they can learn more about what we're doing and those opportunities to expand it here in Hampton Roads. So just a little bit about some of the additional services. I mentioned that BRE and how important it is. So we had 61 BRE visits this past year. You can see some of where we focus that energy because, again, Hampton Roads is a big community, and we're I mentioned Toy, that's one person, and then myself and a couple other staff participate in those opportunities and do some of that BRE outreach as well. So it's a team effort. But we really have to think strategically about what that is, and we want to make sure that we're working closely with our localities on that and that we are a partner with them on that effort. We're not just going out and doing that. So this is sort of a way that we help to identify what are those companies that we need to be paying attention to. So some of it is looking at who are our alliance investors. If they're investing in the alliance, they're obviously interested in investing in the region, making sure it's successful. So we want to talk to them and know what they're thinking. Companies with upcoming expiring leases. So we'll look at CoStar or other databases that we have to figure out, okay, who might be moving, what's shaking out, are they going to renew their lease, do they need to expand and go somewhere else? We surely don't want to lose them. So we take a look at that information as well. Companies identified as growth stage. So I mentioned SVT. That's a great example of a company where we knew was poised for growth, and we wanted to continue to work with them. Those with international headquarters here. That's very important, not only for us to make that relationship here, which is often a plant manager that is running the facility, but when we're traveling internationally, to try to make those connections when we're abroad as well, so that we've got somebody back at home that we have a relationship with as well. Major regional employers, port-related companies again, and then just those that we consider regional assets. So a BRE visit isn't always just a business. Sometimes, again, it's meeting with Christopher Newport and somebody strategic over there, or with NASA or the NIA or others that, Jeff Lab, that are important, or J-Lab, excuse me, I can't call it Jeff Lab. It's Jefferson Lab or J-Lab. that are important to our region. So just a few things again that we've done. We did do a submission for a Build Back Better coalition project. We didn't receive the award for that, but it was still a great exercise for us, because what it did was start to put a thought and a plan, implementation plan in place of what do we want to be? What are some of these future projects that we want to focus our energy and attention on, and how do we go about getting that? We've worked on putting together an infrastructure coalition as well, and then just working with strategic partnerships with the Virginia Economic Developers Association. We've had a close relationship working with them. They actually have some meetings right now in Withville, Virginia. We have some staff that are there currently. Of course, VEDP is a tremendous partner, and we did have Jason Alcubi at a recent investor event. He was recently announced as the new director of VEDP, so we were really enjoyed hosting him and having him talk about what that future vision is for Virginia economic development and the recovery efforts as well. And then working so closely with our regional organizations like the Hampton Roads Workforce Council, Port of Virginia. I mentioned, some of our colleges, our community college system is very important to us as well in that workforce piece. And then business intelligence, of course, I mentioned Steve Harrison, who leads that team. And they're very important to not only helping us internally figure out who we need to talk to and where we need to go, but also working with our localities and our businesses to provide information. So in the case of Poquoson, I know sometimes Dave or Charity have been able to call Steve and say, hey, can you provide me some information on this site or a little bit of demographic data on this? It's programs then that y'all don't have to pay for, that we manage. We know how to access and pull that data together to help tell the story for you guys and make your jobs easier. And then this is just, again, some of those programs that we subscribe to. And marketing for the region. So we have a new marketing campaign that came out this past year with the tagline, every business needs an ally. We've worked with a company in Norfolk, again, making sure we are using companies here. We used to use an economic development marketing company that was well known, that was not even in the state of Virginia. So we are happy to bring that back here and continue to reinvest. But I do, find it tickles us that they came up with such a great tagline, and we're like, why didn't we think of that? So sometimes you need that outside perspective, but they have helped us with the marketing campaign, and it's made over 7 million impressions, so social media impressions, brand engagement across various audiences as well, 1,800 conversations that have occurred on our landing pages. So again, just a little bit about, they help to track some of that information so we can see what our reach is. And then we also recently completed our intelligence report, and if you haven't seen that, I'll make sure that Charity and Dave have the link so that they can get it out to you. But it is some great information in there and some wonderful articles that really feature some of the projects that are going on, for example, with the Offshore Wind or the Unmanned Systems Center of Excellence. And so that is just a little bit about, again, where we are and what we've been doing. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Amy. Certainly I'll open it up for questions or comments of Amy at this time.
Who pays for the work that you do?
So I mentioned it is 50% funded by the localities through an MOU and 50% funded by private investors. So that is, the investors are typically 5,000 and up. We do have investors that are 100,000 investors. Some of the larger corporations in this region, and many on the peninsula that are what we would call our 25,000 or up investors that are very engaged in our efforts. So Huntington Ingalls, Ferguson Enterprises, several W and Jordan that are very engaged, Clancy and Thays, others that are members, investors within our so.
Questions? So for the benefit of the EDA, we do annually include within our budget the public side participation within the Hampton Roads Alliance, and that with the new budget that is scheduled to come down on July 1. That would be something that we would, following that new budget release. Questions you have of us, Amy?
I don't. I'm just very happy to be here again and see some familiar faces. It's, with the pandemic, been a little bit of time before I've been in these rooms, and I feel like they were turned around or something a little different than the last time I was here, but it's nice to be back. And to your question, too, I will mention we are a 501c3 nonprofit as well. So.
Well, certainly, the last 2 years have been, I'll say, the exception of the normal for business, and so kudos to the Alliance and the work that you have been doing and being able to keep the face of Hampton Roads out there in the broader place that has certainly seemed to have its stressors over the last 2 years.
Thank
So.
you.
Thanks, Amy.
So with that, that brings us to our next item under new business, and this is consideration of City Council's property request. And Randy's here to help make an introduction to this, and best to answer questions that may pop up.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the EDA this morning. It's always nice to follow the Alliance as well. I've been in Hampton Roads now 13 years, and I've seen the Alliance in its 2 previous iterations, which were, by general agreement, suboptimal. And Doug and Amy and others represent that last iteration, the time they got it right. They're doing outstanding work in Hampton Roads, and so it was nice to reorder the agenda to listen to your presentation. They offered me the opportunity to go first. I said, no, I'd really like to listen to what you've got to say. Amy's done a great job, and Doug is fantastic, and so is the rest of the staff. So, like I said, they've finally gotten it right, and not only have they gotten it right, but they continue to move the bar upward. And that's a pretty cool thing. And sometime, when you have more time, just have them come back and talk about offshore wind. They can do that for 2 or 3 hours, and you'll still feel like you only scratched the surface. Anyway, sorry for that digression. I was thinking, as Amy was getting ready to talk, how I would begin this conversation. When does it begin? And I'm not sure that I just decided to pick a point and recognize that there was stuff going on prior to that, but really this story in its current iteration begins in 2018. And what happens in 2018 is the comprehensive plan is completed by the Planning Commission. Lots of different groups have input into the comprehensive plan, including, I believe, the EDA, Parks and Recreation Board, city staff, others, community. And as part of that, the Planning Commission recommended and the City Council adopted in their formal adoption of the comprehensive plan that a feasibility study should be conducted to look at the feasibility of combining the police station and the police station activities as we know it, which are largely in the old bank building, but we also have some additional facilities that are not as obvious. And additionally, look at our Emergency Operations Center. I believe you've been in our conference room. That is it. It's a terrific Emergency Operations Center as long as you don't actually need it. When you do need it and you have sustained operations over a period of time, it's really not what we need, but it is what we could make do with, and we'll continue to do that. And then lastly, fire administration. Fire administration, as you may know, is located on the top of the municipal building. It has enough space. How it is laid out and the access to that space is suboptimal, and the entire municipal building itself is either in need of a substantial redo or, more likely, a removal and plan for something else. So in 2018, we began that process. We had a retreat with the City Council in early 2019, in which we reviewed the capital projects-related aspects of the or of the comprehensive plan that they just adopted, and we asked them for their thoughts and their guidance. And one piece of that was their greenlighting at that time the feasibility study. So we conducted it in 2019. It was presented to City Council in December of 2019. And the very short version of that was, yes, this made sense. And it also provided, they didn't do a site evaluation, but they provided some things that we ought to think about in their opinion as we did it ourselves. So at that point in 2019, we presented it, and the City Council, let's just say they didn't have an immediate response. And I think in large measure, not to speak for them specifically, we had this large middle school project that was making its way forward, and I believe that the council wanted to make sure that the budget that we had for the middle school was sufficient. Until something is done, you're never quite sure. That includes the major contracting aspects, and by the time we got to the beginning of this calendar year, the middle school project was substantially advanced to the point that we could see the end budgetarily. And by the way, that project is not only on schedule, it's a little ahead of schedule, and it is within its revised budget. And so that project will complete this calendar year. It's a question of when. Some people hoping a little sooner than originally planned for December. The original idea was to go complete through the Christmas break and come back to the new school. That may be, may have even better news than that as we move forward. So I tell you that story to sort of lay out the context. In February of this year, as we looked as a community on how to best allocate some of the federal money we were getting, American Recovery Plan, ARPA. Some of that money can be used for flexible government projects, and some of it has very tightly controlled criteria. And the flexible portion of that is about $10 million. So at my request, our mayor began informal conversations with members of City Council to see whether or not there was support to advance this project. It had been sitting essentially for 2 years as we waited through the development of the middle school project where we were ready to go. And the preliminary indication was yes, we put it in the budget was approved. It's a mix primarily of ARPA federal funding, but also up to potentially about $4 million in debt service that we have accounted for. We have not yet borrowed, but we have the ability to pay that debt without having to hit the tax rate. We planned for this, and so as I said, it was put in the budget. At the same time, we began the site selection process, and you'll see from the memo all the people that were involved in that, the police chief who was here, the fire chief who was here, Dave Callis, the city engineer, community development, and we began to look at sites within the city. And there are some high priority criteria and some other criteria. In no particular order, but I think you could assemble your own order. The high priority criteria were, one, this really needed to be out of the flood zone. It needed to be of sufficient size. It needed to have, or hopefully needed to have, no extraordinary ingress and egress costs, no extraordinary costs of bringing utilities to a site. And one that was very important, we needed to have a valid wetlands delineation. You all know how long those can take. You know they can be expensive, and you also know in this environmental climate that we're in, the outcome can be somewhat uncertain. So those were the things that we looked at. Whether it was in public ownership or not was a secondary criteria. You know, our budget is only so big. Having said that, if there was a private site that fully met all the other criteria and had a valid wetlands delineation, we would have considered it. But we know of no privately owned site that hits all of those criteria, including that last one, which is the valid wetlands delineation. So what the feasibility study suggested is that we should plan for a site of about 2.75 to 3 acres. The 3 parcels that we're asking you to consider, City Council's asking you to consider, are about 2.1, and there's a schematic in there attached to the memorandum that's in your package. You'll see that we're also planning to potentially use a portion of the city's property straight out behind you, right behind Mr. Freeman, to sort of round that out. So I'm here today making that request. We have, following the City Council's adoption of the budget and their approval of this resolution, we have already begun the process of soliciting an RFP. Should for any reason this property transfer that we're talking about today not come about or not come about timely, we can pull that back at this point. But we have already got the process in motion for lots of reasons. One, things aren't getting cheaper. And two, the ARPA money has some some very rigid guidelines. We need to have the project either completed, all the ARPA projects, by 2024, into 2024, or at least under contract with a final completion no later than 2026. That seems like a long way away, but just based on the middle school experience only, the amount of time necessary to go through design and other things, as well as construction, is always going to be longer than you would think it would be. And so we're planning to get that done. I know in conversations with the chairman, we talked recently about the property, the fact that the EDA does have within its budget and makes every attempt to pay the interest on the properties that you own. As you will recall, when I got here 13 years ago, the EDA had a line of credit. It was basically an interest-only line of credit. At some point, as we, as a community, sort of dug out of the hole of the 2009 recession, one of the things that we did was to take that debt on as more traditional city debt. So the city has been paying the debt service, not just the interest, which you've assisted with, but the principal as well. And in fact, according to Tanya, 2028, we will have completed paying the principal off. So we've been essentially paying the principal side of the mortgage, and with your assistance also paying the interest side. Beyond that, I'll stop talking. I'm glad to answer any questions. Both chiefs are here. Not only can they speak to their disciplines if you have questions, but also they were part of the site selection committee. So at this time, if you've got questions for me, I'll do my best to answer them.
So questions specific of Randy or either of the chiefs at this point in time?
I just have a question. And this is, and I know right now it's awfully early to be asking this question. I understand, and I think everybody else does, that this is also a valuable piece of property, I guess is the way to put it. I also understand the fact that, having dealt with this before, you got to move on it right now, or you're not going to get it because of the federal money. So, and you have to be approved, and I understand that. I'm concerned about the access to the property east of this property. Okay, I'm not trying to confuse you. The property behind this, if you look at your, yes, it faces Victory, but I would think that if there was some way that when this is being constructed, that you could have it so that it'd be a street to go to, rather than having to come in from Victory. I'm asking the question because right now, it looks like to me, we're pretty much taking over everything on the east side of City Hall Avenue. Is that correct? When I look at this chart.
Yes.
Those are the three.
So that being said, and I see the city owns this piece is 37%?
That's a portion. We also own the one that's 63%.
Yes, I
We own
know.
both pieces of
And
that,
you're taking part of the 63,
probably all of it.
all of it, okay. So my question is, I can't read the name on that one.
Champagne.
Champagne and Hahn.
Han.
Okay, and I don't know if there's more property because you can't see it here, but I don't think there is.
No.
So access to that property, if it's sold for a business or something like that, would be able to be provided in this property that we're going to get? Because I think it's going to be super expensive if you can even get it off of Victory. That was one of the things I heard you say about this property being so good is the fact
Sure.
we don't have to do a very expensive access to it. I guess I'm trying to say somehow or other, we should not landlock the two behind us. A, if you might need it later for the city. You know, I know
Right.
how this goes. Or B, if someone came along and wanted to buy that property. I'm thinking, and tell me if I'm thinking which or not, I'm thinking if you get something in here, it's going to be either a medical facility. It's not going to be a store is what I'm trying to say. I don't see it. You've already got those sitting empty in places now. And I don't. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to landlock that property. And there's some other property back here too. I don't even know whose it is.
I'll be pleased to speak to that.
And I know it's early, don't get me wrong.
The Hahn property is accessed directly off of Beta Street, so
Okay.
it's not landlocked.
Okay, good.
The other property you identified as the Champagne property is landlocked now.
Right,
So no action that we would take would make it any more landlocked.
okay.
Another item, just for your general knowledge, the city has, in the past, can't speak for the current city council, but I can speak for past efforts because I was part of it, has offered to, and been desirous of completing the extension of the portion of City Hall Avenue back to Alpha Street and connecting Beta Street. And we're willing to put the public funds necessary to build those roads and to provide access to those properties in exchange for the right-of-way necessary to build those roads. That was determined to be an insufficient amount of public investment in those properties, at which point the conversations ended. I do not believe that the city has, I can't speak for the EDA, I'm not attempting to, but the city does not have a compelling governmental purpose to buy the entirety of all of those properties for the purpose of putting in a road.
Oh, I can understand that.
But that has been the previous discussion. I would imagine, should the property owners wish to pursue with that, we could get that in the comprehensive plan and get that done. So my whole point in saying that is, if these folks want access, there is a path for them, and that path is through the donation of the appropriate public right-of-way so that we could build that connector road. Absent that, they could gain access to their property by their building the access to their property. So they have that option as well. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, because I didn't realize that you could access Hahn's property, which would get you to the Champagne property from the other side.
Yeah, in fact, on Beta Street, there's actually a driveway apron connection there. And there may even be more than one, but I know there's one.
Other questions of Randy at this time?
Yeah, a couple comments. Big picture, we of course want to be good stewards and do what's best overall for the city. Just kind of looking at this big picture, we've really got, EDA really has two sites. We have the acreage across the road that's, a much larger development. It's trickier. You got probably assemblage involved. You got a very unique use that can swallow that and try to make a deal there. So that's a tricky site. And this one here was much more of a self-contained, more or less ready-to-go site, for reasons somewhat you articulated. I'm just curious, the site selection process. What else did you really look at? I mean, is there nothing else in the city? I mean, my initial reaction is, to take something that's really front and center, retail-type use, an entrance to the city location, it seems a little unusual to make that a public service use, which could really be, that's kind of down a side street, down a back road. It seems unusual to put that so front and center, especially when we have basically no other parcels to offer anybody. So that's my initial concern about it. I mean, we've got trying to bring businesses and have properties that are on the tax rolls, and this takes out probably the best one. Reasons you articulated, what makes it attractive to you, for instance, wetlands, so on and so forth. I mean, you're right, but I mean, if how's a business going to needle through the city and find something? It's that hard for you guys to needle through the city and find something. So, what's a business going to do? They're never going to find a site here in town if it's going to be that difficult. You guys have had a little more time, have more resources. A business isn't going to go through all this. Got federal funding to help this out. Was there no other site that could be included in that budget, $500,000 or whatever for the land? There's just nothing else out there. That's what's bouncing around in my head. And again, we want to do the right thing, and I just don't know how deep y'all dove on the other site selection.
Well, I can speak generally for the team, and the criteria first was you've got to get out of the flood zone. So you're familiar with the map, so you know now the portion of the city that we're in. And then we looked at property that were big enough that had a current wetlands delineation. That makes for a pretty small subset. There is no other property that I'm aware of sufficient size that has a current wetlands delineation that could work for this property, for this project. So that's why we're here. There are, we talked about, for example, Mr. Derby's question about the Champaign and the Han properties. We could potentially acquire those properties. There's no wetlands delineation on those properties. So one, we would have to acquire them, which is a cost that's not built into our budget at this point. And we have the time and the uncertainty of the wetlands delineation. If, being quite candid, in 2019, the City Council had said, yes, begin this process. We may have gone a different path, but the project essentially sat, not acted upon for 2 years, and now the ARPA money comes available, which has a timeline to it. The city could spend the next 9 months pursuing wetlands delineations on other properties. And if the EDA, for whatever reason, chooses not to agree to the City Council's request, that, along with terminating the project, will be the options that we'll look at. I understand every point you're making, Mr. Matz. I absolutely do. But the delineations and the size and the floodplain drove us here. We didn't start here. In fact, the larger assemblage was discussed at some point as a possible partial use of that. But as you're aware, there's no current wetlands delineation on the larger assemblage across the street.
You're saying that the parcel that the EDA owns across the street does not have a wetlands delineation?
Not at present.
Okay.
Does or does not?
Does not.
Okay.
The three pieces we're talking about today do. Just for your continuing knowledge, and if Dave, if I get this wrong, correct me, but you also have a valid delineation on your property that if this is oriented north to south, immediately north, next to the Sevilla building, and the city has in process requested approval of a delineation on its two pieces, or its pieces that are shown here as well. But we don't have those at this point, but it's in process with the Corps. But taken together, those three small city parcels and the EDA's parcel are not of sufficient size. We would need to acquire probably the Johnson tract, which doesn't have a delineation on it, to the best of my knowledge. So that's.
My initial question, so you're saying your three there plus our EDA, it's not large enough?
That's correct. If you take to try to give you a sense of this on the map, if you look at the three parcels that the city council is requesting, plus the portion that says city 6.3, that is getting close to, but not really beyond the minimum site size that was calculated by the consultant that did the feasibility study for us. So if you were to take that and transport that across to the other side of City Hall Avenue, you can see how that doesn't set up very well.
I understand the target was 2 3/4 to 3 acres,
Yes, sir.
plus or minus. So,
I know working with the ARPA grants, there is a very tight timeline. And, I mean, to get $10 million, basically free money, that's a lot for a city our size. And it's not like the city doesn't need the police, we're talking a new police department and a place for the fire and rescue to do their administrative work. And I think that would be important. I mean, people coming into the city want to see a strong police department. They want to see somebody's going to protect their businesses with fire and that sort of thing. And putting this with City Hall, I mean, I think that kind of puts everybody in the same place. You can work together a little bit better. I think it's a good place to put it.
I like it on the City Hall, I agree with you there, I like it across the street. I'm being hard-headed, but,
No, you're not. No, you're not.
I'm being hard-headed, I realize. Is I keep hearing about this consultant, and I keep envisioning, like, okay, but is somebody thinking outside the, I mean, does it have to be exactly what the consultant said? Does it have to be, is there ways to compromise, maybe instead of, 1,000 square feet for this section, it really only needs to be 1,000? I mean, how much thought has there been into going against this sort of perfect world plan? Because that, to me, would be the great spot for it. That's not a great retail use. It's, it's, like you say, it's sort of attached to City Hall. It can't be that much smaller than what we're talking about. It might be half. I'm just spitballing here.
Well, I'll speak to the first part. We hired an architectural firm, a team that does space planning and needs assessment for a living, in part because we don't. We have not gone back and superseded their professional judgment with our own. In conversations with city council members, one way to get at what you just said is to decide if we're going to take all three pieces: police, fire admin, and emergency operations. And while I won't speak specifically for city council, I will tell you that the answer that I got was, this is a once-in-a-generation investment. Let's do it right the first time, including the larger question about space. one of the things that most local governments, including ours, suffers with is that by the time we build a building, it's usually full. We're looking at the prospect of having and wanting to live with this building for decades to come. So there is sufficient space to do that. The way that the space needs, one of the aspects of that was that they met with all of our people. And they walked around their offices. They walked around the evidence storage areas and the witness interview areas and the assembly areas, the emergency operations center, which is a pretty quick tour, as you know. And we worked together to figure out what was, I don't know, optimal, but desirable long term for these uses. So I think we could absolutely shrink them. I think that it would be pretty quick. We'd be trying to figure out how we expand them. And so the council was not, at that time anyway, desirous of taking functions out and didn't seem to be interested in sort of whittling the building down beyond what was presented to them. Now, depending on your decision, we may have to make other decisions. I understand that. I hope I answered your question, Mr. Metz.
Another one that's going to be, Alan, we've already done all that, but the current building, the municipal building, obviously, dropping that and building it there, is that a flood issue?
Yes, sir. That's one of the issues. It's also not big enough unless we take out the baseball field and some other things. But the principal issue is that, both now and looking into the future, the current building we're in for the police department is plus or minus 100 years old. In 100 years, or 50 years, or even 30 years, we have to plan for sea level rise and the other things that we'll confront, not just that we confront now. So we made a purposeful decision, and it was also one that our consultant suggested, but we did it ourselves, to move out of the flood areas, because these buildings, particularly the Emergency Operations Center, but all of them, when they're surrounded by water, our ability to function is impaired. And so that was a principal thing for us. And so when you push into this part of the city, there are limited spaces available, and there are challenges with non-tidal wetlands, as well as the ingress-egress challenges. Even if in a different scenario we were to go across the street to the assemblage, let's assume for a second we had a wetlands delineation at the moment. The cost of getting across, bridging that and getting across, had been previously estimated by VDOT, and this was some years ago, so take these as a notional cost, was $1 million worth of ingress, egress, assuming you didn't have a traffic light, at which point it would be another $500,000 on top of that. And again, these are several years old, so you'd have to take that with that caveat. So we have limited choices. And unless you all can come up with some ideas that we haven't, and we'll go staff those as best we can.
Oh, sorry. Just, I was around and was also involved when this was built. So I know that the building down there was, at the time, was said to be, and I know it was, not sufficient for what, it should have been empty, in other words, and there shouldn't have been people in there at that time when this was built. The older City Hall. I think the main thing, and yes, we need a police department, fire department there, but the main thing, I think, the most important thing is the emergency services building. Part of it is what I'm saying for myself, wherever we end up putting it. That can't be in a flood zone, as far as I'm concerned. It also has to be, and we don't want to lose fact of it, but it also has to be accessible for us to help our neighbors or them to help us. I've learned that from the one the city of Hampton has and where it's sitting, which is very interesting. And the other thing I always question when involved with cities, and when I looked at this, I was concerned, is what we're doing going to really be big enough? And I know that sounds foolish. I'm not talking building-wise necessarily, but property. Got a lot of parking involved and can be a lot more when you. So, and I agree with what, especially when you start talking about the value of the property. But I think she brought up a very legitimate point, believe me. It would be hard to press to figure out where you're going to pick up. This is the only chance we got. Well, this is the only chance we've got. And I'm talking about the grant we're going to get from the federal. I guess my other question was, which you're not worried about right now is, but the Champagne piece, if we do this one, the Champagne piece of property behind, while you're doing this, my thought would be that, you know about this than I do, but that we should be also looking at that to see if we can buy that. Not before we get this, I'm not saying that, but if it's available. I've never seen it yet, but I remember when this was built and everybody was saying how nice it was and it was way too big, and then next thing, changing offices and everything else to keep the people in here. So I'm well aware of what we're talking about here.
Well,
I'm not going to try everybody up with a whole long speech. I'm just saying to you, even though I'll have to say it is a very odd choice of property that fronts on two busy streets, but I'll have to say that I do understand why you want to do it, why it needs to be done. So.
Well, I appreciate that. As I said previously, I can't think of a reason why the city would have an interest in acquiring the Champagne property. Now, would we have an interest in someday connecting Alpha Street Extended and providing service to that property? Sure. If the owner of that property somehow showed up today with a completed wetlands delineation and a price close to the assessed value of the property, I can't speak for council, but I think they'd consider it. Neither of those things have been in play before. I do want to say, and I appreciate the points that the several of you made. We're not at as quickly as we need to go. I don't want to leave you with the impression that we have to make this decision right now and this is the only decision we can make. I believe this is the best decision we can make, and that's why we're here asking for it, and that's why the city council approved it. But if you've got a better idea, we're ready to receive it and to do with it the best we can as the staff.
Are there any follow-up questions, and at which time we can kind of open up for internal discussion amongst the directors?
We have enough parking for all the city, the employees, the police cars, and fire trucks, or whatever else go that the fire chief and the deputy fire chief. Do we have enough parking is another big thing that we need to worry about.
Do we have enough parking currently?
No, with this new.
Well, we haven't designed the building yet.
Okay.
But the scope, the feasibility study did include, in the space calculation, the size calculation of the footprint of the property, did include appropriate parking for both the general public and for the public safety uses. That's part of why it gets bigger than just building a building. I believe, subject to correction, I believe there are 50 parking spaces proposed with the building, which would accommodate public as well as if every one of our police officers was there today with their cars and all of our emergency operations staff and our fire admin people, we would still have some parking spaces remaining. And it would be unusual for every one of our police officers to be in there at one time. But But just to give you a sense of that, that would still leave 10-plus parking spaces if everybody that was involved was there at one time, including all the emergency operation A shift or B shift.
Randy, you talked about doing this building, purchasing this property, and using the $10 million for that. Does that, and the $4 million in debt, will that include like knocking down the old building that like Parks and Rec is in, and any, raising that so that property can be used for something?
No, ma'am, not at this point. The budget that we came up with, what we did in October, I think it was October, it was recently, we had the consultant that did the original work update the construction estimates based on an anticipated commencement of construction activities of July 1, 2023. And so that budget, which is at presently, including contingencies and things, right around $12.8 million, does not include, we've not even made a decision to do this yet, so we have not come up with a plan on what to do with the municipal building. Now, I'll tell you what I think we ought to do, recognizing that that's not just my decision. We ought to tear it down and retire it. It is at the end of its useful life, well beyond it. It's served our community well. If fire admin leaves, then the question is what happens to fire and rescue, Parks and Rec. And I think the current police department building will work just fine for that. We may have to look to a different way to do our partnership with the Peninsula Area on Aging and their programs, but I'm confident we can get that done. So we haven't got there yet, but we've been planning since well before my arrival on the imminent removal of that building. And I remember one of the conversations I had fairly early on, we had some problems with the roof. And they had not been doing anything to the roof because the building was imminently going to come down. And I said, well, just in case it doesn't, let's fix this roof. And they had like an option that they would sort of guarantee that it would work for 5 years or 10 years. And that was kind of getting pushed to let's do the 5 years because we don't need to pay for something because this building's going to imminently come down. Well, we did the 10 years, and we have since worked on the roof some more. But the point is that building has been imminently coming down for more than 13 years.
If nothing left to ask Randy, thank you for the presentation, your time, and your willingness to kind of share. And we can kind of open it up to discussion amongst the directors.
I'll open that up. As I see it, conveying this property out is defeating the whole mission of the EDA, which is to expand the tax basis of the city. This does nothing to help that. We're sitting right here on top of it's asking for second most valuable piece of property, the 8 acres being the most valuable. At some point in time, this property is going to have to probably be merged up with the Champaign piece and the Han piece, as I see it. It just about has to. We're sitting right here on top of the biggest land project that I've seen since I've lived here. That's the Legacy. That's got to increase value. And we're going to give all of that up off of the tax rolls. Can't support it, sorry.
I am,
And, excuse me, and I think probably, I don't know how many pieces y'all look at? You don't have to give me a number, you did a good.
Ms. Freeman, we looked at every piece of property that was out of the floodplain, that had a wetlands delineation on it, that was big enough.
That already had the wetlands delineation.
That's correct.
Because
was
I'm
part
looking
of
at
our
two
criteria.
pieces right here on West Creek Road. It doesn't, I don't know whether they got delineation or not. Right here on West Creek Road, that to me would probably satisfy your needs. One of them is gonna be the Hunt property, that's across from the dental office.
I do.
And then there's another piece up there, just as you come across the bridge, that's been cleared, right on the 200 block of West Creek Road.
Yes, sir.
That's been raised, by ground elevation, been raised.
Yes, sir.
I don't know whether that's available, but that's something I think that y'all could pursue. And another piece now up there is much more acreage, but it could be worked out. And that's, I'll explain it. Right up there, close to the Hunt Woods piece, the Hunt property. I'll show it to you if you want to see it. But anyway, I just have a hard time giving up value for this project. It just doesn't make any good sense, and it doesn't, it's not the highest and best use of this property, as I see it.
Could I answer a couple of things Henry said, if you don't mind? One, the Hunt property is already zoned commercial. Could be used for a lot of things, as Henry's saying, it could be used for this too. It also has a retention pond on it. Right at the 8-foot level, I can't tell you that that's all. Of course, it certainly wouldn't have considered wetlands since it's been everything. I don't know if that's big enough for you. I don't know. I really don't. I know approximately how big it is, but. I don't know.
1.82 acres.
I don't think it might be because of the fact it's so close to Oxford Run and also the, can't say that. You could put a parking lot that way, I guess. The other piece of property, and you're right there where you come across the bridge, that's where that one time they wanted to put a retirement home or whatever you want to call it there. Unfortunately, that piece of property has a drainage problem. That would be hard to overcome. Plus, the fill that's there is not suitable to do what you want to do. I can tell you, I watched it being done and I knew the guy that was doing it. So I think it's going to be very difficult and hard to hunt property if it was big enough, but I don't think it is. I think it's going to be very hard for you to come up with something else. I agree. Now, as I said to begin with, I'm concerned about using property like, that has a location this, but right now, it looks like to me it's the only option we have, and I think it's very important that we get the services moved out of the flood zone. I do know about the municipal building, as you call it, I call it the old city hall. It needs to come down. I was told it was coming down when we moved here. Okay. And I said, no, it's going to be storage, and then within 2 years, it's going to be full of people. And because they had to build steps on the outside. Anyway, that's exactly what happened. And that's normal. That's a very common thing that happens in any city or any other corporation or whatever you want to pick. That's why I ask about the other. It seems like every time you do something and go somewhere, you always need more, very, not too far down the road.
Other comments?
Since, this site selection research was done, and everybody was around, across the street, somebody then must have the total acreage of 4 parcels, 3 cities, and EDA piece. Someone has that acreage.
It's available. I don't know that anyone right now has it, but.
I mean,
Yeah.
I was told this is too small. So, how big is that? Obviously, that was researched, right?
Indeed was, sir, and it's basically 1.5 plus or minus. And that's given an assumption, a large assumption, that the city will have that confirmed by the Corps. I can speak personally to those experiences. That's not a guarantee.
reset or start this whole initiative over. Now to talk about a piece we don't own, but I would have loved to have seen see, hey, looks high and dry or doesn't, because those walkthroughs are usually pretty darn accurate about what you're going to get at the end of the day. Someone goes out there and says it's high and dry, it's probably high and dry. If they say it's wet, it's probably wet. I would have loved to have seen that done on Johnson. Got all the room in the world you want with the others. Accessible, but it's not a retail parcel. Even without Johnson, I'm not 100% convinced. The last one in the back could be a parking field. The other one's supposed to be building up front. I'm spitballing, and someone might say, no, Alan, you're completely wrong, because we already checked all that. But I don't, that acreage just isn't that far off what you're trying to get.
And if I may just clarify, Mr. Metz, when I said 1.5 plus or minus, that includes your parcel, your EDA 1.06, which is adjacent to the Sevilla building, if you will.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure that we were clear and apples, oranges,
Right, yeah,
and
the whole
oranges.
run there.
Just to address the Johnson piece, I can speak to this. We have, and I'll ask the city attorney and others who may have a knowledge of that history as well. We've approached the Johnsons before, more than once, and they've indicated absolutely no desire to enter into an agreement with the city. It's been my experience in that regard. So I think the Johnson piece is certainly viable and would be wonderful to use. We just haven't been able to get it under control.
I think it's important to remember that this $10 million is only available for a short period of time. I question, and I've only been on the EDA for a very short time, how long has these parcels that we keep defending, that they has the wetlands delineation, how long has that been around? I mean, have we had anybody asking about it? Has anybody come forward and wanted to use that property?
You want to know how long we've owned it? Is that one of your points?
Well, I want to know, since it's had the wetlands delineation and it's been available, has anybody come forward and asked about it?
Actually, I tried to get a boutique hotel. I always thought it'd be ideal in that corner to have a boutique hotel with a gathering room and some different things. And I had a couple hotel chains that I talked to, but they wanted the city, because they knew the city would like something like that, to come present a reasonable price and not retail. They wanted it subsidized and offer the property at a lower price. So they wouldn't move forward without a serious negotiation for a major price difference. So that was one of the things. I mean, it's been different opportunities talked about. I also had envisioned a potential walkable retail corridor coming down to City Hall Avenue, especially Legacy going in. So there's been, different things that we've looked at, possibility, and we have spoken to people. I mean, like I spoke to 2 different hotel groups about it.
To your question, I think it's important to also note, and certainly understand Director Freeman's point regarding the Legacy could make the property more viable. I don't know. Certainly seems like it might be able to, but I think it's important to note the confirmation that we've just received on the Lockowitz parcel. That's not our first confirmation. When we acquired the property, I believe in 2011, this is either the second or third confirmation that we've received. And I can speak personally to it. I'm very, very grateful that we were able to get it confirmed with the assistance of the EDA and city staff, because in my mind, there were times that there was just no guarantee. So I'm happy that it is under confirmation for the next few years, but I think it's important to note that it's been a while, and we keep reconfirming it. And I understand what Charity mentioned as well, but we've not had a viable offer on the property that I'm aware of. So
So, and how many years have we owned this?
I believe 2011 was when we acquired it. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman, I think?
That's about the right time. It's approximately 10 or 11 years ago. And just to speak briefly to the environmental and the wetlands aspect, it's been what used to be a fairly straightforward timeline that they tended to operate under based upon a delineation or reconfirmation process has been sidelined in the last 24 to 36 months, partially due to COVID and people's availability, but just the timeliness with which reactions and responses were given. It took us almost 6 months to actually get we received vocal that the reconfirmation was received for the parcels we're talking about today, and it took us in excess of 6 months to actually get that in writing. So it's a very, I'll say it's uncharted waters as to what your experience will be in that process. So I certainly appreciate the challenge that the city and city council is in, and I guess as I sit, public safety and having public safety and have that in an area that we know the response can occur regardless of what Mother Nature or other events kind of get thrown upon the city. I think it's important that planning and due diligence has been done to get the city where they are. The notion now that there is money available connected with a fairly short timeline. 2 years in the development world is not that long to have a set of plans prepared, contract ready to move forward. Construction side in today's market is certainly much more constrained than it was, say, 4 years ago. We kind of find ourselves where we are, given the circumstances that have laid out to get to this point. And while I certainly can see and concur that this is a very valuable piece as it relates potentially to a tax cycle, personally in the camp of if this is the pathway forward to allow the project to move forward, I certainly think it's worth consideration based on that mark that we have kind of public safety that down. Certainly have to put faith in the city and the space planning consultants that they certainly have planned, not just for the needs of 2022, but are looking to the needs of 2052 or whatever timetable they may have been putting towards the future looking to this, because public safety 20 years ago is very different than public safety is today. Continue to evolve, and the experts there and can probably vouch way better than I can. So I think at this point, is there further discussion?
Be quiet. When we talk about wetlands, I think a lot of people don't understand that the land does not have to be wet. That's very important to understand, because I've been involved with it myself on some of my own property. If it's a certain thing growing there, and it doesn't have to be wet, it's drainable property, you could actually build on it. This has changed, it's gotten much worse in the last few years. And it's just a nightmare. In Poquoson, anyway, I can't say other places, but I think a lot of other places too. So I did want to mention that, because when you walk the property, yes, and here's that that's what he does. And he's looking for the plants more than he's looking for the water anymore. Thanks.
Right, just keep in mind, that applies to businesses on locations too.
Exactly, exactly.
I'll make one more comment, then I promise I'm gonna shut up too. Back to my piece across the street, the back parcel that the city owns, coming south towards us here, next to it, that's city property. Can you square that off to make the piece rectangular and attached to the last city parcel? Can you square that off right here?
Talking about right here, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He's
The piece,
asking.
the piece
Where the
that
pathway is to
accesses
go
the
for
fitness
walk,
trail
For the trail.
and
Access
the
to
future
city.
right-of-way, I guess.
You would have that road access, whatever the heck it is, when you turn to the roundabout right, and that would access now to the corner of the site, as well as the City Hall Avenue would give you, I'll bet anybody lunch as much acreage as across the road. Well, Barfing dog, not surf rider, I'm not gonna pay that, but,
Yeah.
cheap lunch. But I'll bet you that'd be as much acreage as across the street. If I heard you right, there's wetlands delineations there.
Not on, you have one on this property that expires in
You have
approximately
preliminary
15
on the
months.
city.
We are in process on these 3 parcels
But
here.
it says dry, you're just waiting for confirmation.
No, we don't have that yet. It's under evaluation by our wetlands consultant, and they have walked it, and they will get us a report that we can then choose at the manager's and council's discretion whether to move forward with that. But I don't think if this is a football game, we're not on the 50-yard line. We're
How did y'all order that?
I want to say we ordered those 3 or 4 months ago, sir?
Yeah.
Maybe a little longer?
And there's 2 other things involved there that may or may not matter, I don't know. But there's a retention pond right out of the picture to your left. And then there's also the big main ditch that's not very far.
Is that the Oxford Run?
Yes. It's on the edge of this property. I can't tell you exactly where it is, I really can't.
Right.
But the retention pond is right,
And obviously, you're not gonna be able to go too far, I just didn't know if you could
Yeah.
square that.
It's not gonna be big enough.
well, you can't get too close to the retention pond.
Right, yeah.
So at this point, I think we have the opportunity to make a motion, opportunity to engage in further discussion down the road if there's some additional research or conversations that need to happen. Questions that need to be asked, we certainly can ask them.
I don't know how to phrase this motion, but I'd like to go ahead and move that we let the city purchase, I guess that's what they would do, is purchase,
Transfer, maybe?
transfer, I guess, this property to the city for the use of the new safety building, I guess is what they're going to call it.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Any questions?
I got a motion by Kathy and a second by Kara. Thank you. I'm sorry,
You're
I
welcome.
didn't hear it.
Any further conversation needed on the motion? Any questions?
First, the statement itself is basically allow the city property, and I can fill in the specifics of it, to the city from the EDA for a new safety building.
Public safety building.
Okay. Call for the vote. Director Freeman.
No.
Director Joyce.
Yes.
Director Derby. Yes. Director Fye.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Metz.
Abstain.
Chairman Booth.
Yes.
Okay, well, carries 4 positive.
Thank you, Charity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Moves us to unfinished business, which I'm not aware of any thing that we need to take up at this point. Moves us down to staff activities and ARPA grant fund.
Yes, the ARPA committee, which is also comprised with Kathy and Ray from the EDA, had a meeting, and with the consultants, we had the consultants on the phone for over an hour to try and firm up what the meaning and intent of some of these questions that we had, because this grant is not, it's not a straight line, it's very fuzzy. And basically, my impression, and you can chime in here also, Kathy, is that the city has a lot of flexibility on this. As long as the city feels that it's, going to grow the business, basically, or be a positive, they're allowing it. I mean, if you want to give a salary increase, they said that was okay. If you want to expand your building, the new building,
A lot of the businesses had they added outdoor dining. Some of the businesses expanded their retail space. We had a couple create retail space. Some are upgrading their social media and electrical and lighting and air conditioning and all kinds of things, all which make for the businesses to be more profitable. I think it's a good thing. There are places in the United States, we're just lucky that the city gave us this $200,000 to work with our small businesses. There was a lot of, I happen to know that there's states that didn't give their cities money, and then the city gave the small economic development some money. And a lot of places did not do that. They kept it for the state themselves. But I think there's a lot going on. We still have money to give out, so we're hoping to get some more applications in.
I think that from the businesses that I have spoken with, I have a list of the 3 that I asked Donald to sign for us today that he had approved that equates to, I think, $35,000 of it. I think we probably have another 3 or 4 businesses that are right there. I need a couple more pieces of paper from them or something that'll equate to probably another $50,000 or so. I think that we would be pretty close to half of the money allocated. And then I've spoken with enough businesses that I feel will probably receive the additional applications for the rest of the money. So I think a few more meetings, and there's a good chance we could be able to put money to good use.
What is it going to be? We're hoping by the end of the summer we'll have the money.
That is my hope, for sure.
Given out. Yeah.
So that's where we are.
Poquoson Shop and Dine.
Go right ahead, ma'am. I think she has some props.
Okay, so the
Some
end
things
of
she may be
June,
showing you, though.
we're having another shop and dine weekend, and although the businesses generally participate, they don't always tell us what they're going to do ahead for us to advertise it as much as we would like to. But really, I look at it as the city is supporting our businesses by doing a number of different activities and events. And one of the things that we do have, we're coming out with a number of nice giveaways. All you have to do is go to, during those 3-day weekend, is go spend some money and bring the receipts in at Poquoson businesses, usually equating to $50 to $75. I think it's $50 this time. And we'll give you this nice tote bag. So, but basically, there are a number of fun activities that we're just trying to remind people, go out and support Poquoson businesses. Go eat out, go buy some things, and just support each other and support our Poquoson businesses. Also, Dave, I mean, you're having your big Parks and Rec event that weekend as well.
Thank you, Charity. Good point. We're having Picnic in the Park on Saturday, June 25th, which will include Slap Nation, the band, and we're going to do fireworks, and we're hoping for a great turnout. We've already got a lot of participation from our civic groups, and we just need good weather. So we certainly like to have some of that, but
Put
we
in
think
the
it's
order.
going to. we think we'll have a great turnout, and it's obviously we were able to have the parade this year, but it's been a long time coming, y'all, since we've been able to do an event of this magnitude in the city, and it's certainly well deserved for the folks that live here, and we're excited to be able to program and put it forth. And I may just add as I think an important side note, City Council is funding it. They put forth an appropriation of $20,000 for us to have this. And so we're going to be able to offer ostensibly for free. Parking is free. We'll have some rides and kids' activities. Those will be free. The food will be pay-as-you-go. And so we're looking forward to a great evening for the city.
Thanks, Dave. In normal fashion, pending any business that shows up that we need to take care of in the months of July and August, would propose that we plan to hold our next meeting September 13th, which is actually the second Tuesday of September, with the first Tuesday generally being the start of school. And we try and let the kids get on the bus for those of them that still have to do that. And pending anything that pops up that we do need to take action. Call a meeting in July or August. So with that, would like to adjourn this morning's meeting. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. See you in September.
See you in September.
See you in September.